Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Growth and Regen Scrutiny panel. The first order of business today will be to appoint the chair for the meeting. Do we have any nominations from the members here today?
From myself, Councillor Zarina Amin.
Do we have anybody to second that nomination, please?
Seconded, yep.
Right, can I invite Councillor Amin to sit at the chair's table, please? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Zarina Amin. Can we just start with some introductions on councillors who are present?
Councillor Liz Smage, Chair of Scrutiny, here to observe. Thank you.
Councillor Shabir Pando. Tyler Hawkins, Dalton Ward Councillor.
John Taylor, Cuthberton Ward.
Harry McCarthy from Colne Valley Ward.
I'm David Shepherd, I'm Strategic Director for Growth and Regeneration.
I'm Andrea Lane, I'm the team leader in the planning policy team.
Jo Scrutiny, planning policy group leader.
I'm Edward Highfield, I'm Service Director for Skills and Regeneration.
Councillor Graham Turner, Portfolio Finance and Regen.
Thank you. I'd like to start just by thanking Councillor Moses Crook, who's no longer chair of this panel. He's been promoted to Cabinet now. Just to kick off, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Chris Friend, Jonathan Milner and Councillor Susan Lee Richards.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can anyone approve those?
There were only two members who could approve this. It's yourself and Councillor Lee Richards. And Councillor Lee Richards is not here today, so the minutes will have to go to the next formal panel meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any admissions from the public? Do any members have any interest to declare? All agenda items are public. Do we have any deputations or petitions?
We had received one deputation, but that has been subsequently withdrawn. Again, Chair, there were some questions submitted, but they were not within the remit of this panel.
Thank you. We will now look at interim housing position statement for boosting supply. Can I invite the officers to present their...
I'll just do a quick introduction, Chair, if you don't mind. Obviously, this is reporting how we're going to try and boost our housing supply in the light that we haven't got a 5-year supply anymore. So we need to address that. So this is an interim statement to help us try and boost that number of houses we have put into the being built and trying to address that 5-year land supply. So they also go through it in detail, and then we'll all be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. The context for the statement is that the Kirklees local plan housing requirement is to build 1,730 new homes each year. Since the local plan was adopted in 2019, we've successfully maintained a rolling 5-year supply of housing land against this requirement. However, the annual update for the 5-year land supply this year shows that we have a 3.96 supply of housing land. This triggers a presumption in favour of sustainable development when an authority doesn't have a 5-year land supply, which means that when we're determining planning applications, we should be granting housing development. And this is known as the tilted balance. The presumption in favour of development is triggered unless the policies that protect areas or assets of a particular importance, such as the green belt or listed buildings, provide a clear reason for refusal, or the adverse impacts of the development significantly outweigh the benefits. As a response to this trigger, we have prepared a position statement to provide clarity for agents, developers and the public about how the tilted balance will be applied to planning applications for housing in the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. The statement itself sets out 3 principles that will be used in the decision making in determining planning applications. The first principle sets out what the presumption in favour of development means, what the policy is, and that is taken from national planning policy guidance, which has to be applied when we don't have a 5-year land supply. It doesn't mean that this will overrule general planning considerations. The second principle in the statement relates to safeguarded land sites, and these sites are currently protected in the local plan from development, but are intended to be assessed for future development in the next local plan. These sites were not allocated for housing in the local plan because they had some specific site constraint, such as highway issues. The presumption in favour of sustainable development will be applied to these sites where these constraints can be overcome. The third principle relates to the quality of design, that when the tilted balance is triggered, we will still apply policies which relate to seeking high quality design in developments and the principles set out in our supplementary planning documents which relate to house building design. The statement also includes a summary of wider council actions that are already being undertaken to help boost supply and deliver new homes, such as work with Housing Growth and our Homes and Neighbourhoods team. In terms of the next steps, the position statement will go to Cabinet on the 21st of December to seek approval for it to be used to help determine planning applications with a view to be published in January. That covers the main points of this statement. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that explanation. I think we all understand the position we're in. I don't think anybody disputes that. I do have personal concerns about some of the safeguarded land sites that have been allocated within my own ward, where clearly there are significant highways issues around how you would access or exit the sites. And I just wonder, in terms of sustainable development, how you achieve that understanding of what the sort of right answer is for those sites if they were to be brought forward.
The statement sets out the principles that will be used in determining planning applications. We would need to wait for the details of those applications to come forward and to consider and look at how those constraints will be overcome, such as the highway constraints. It may be that third-party land would be required. At the time that we did the local plan, that constraint may not have been able to be overcome, but it may be now that that constraint could possibly be addressed or mitigated against.
Supplementary?
Yeah, can I ask then, if you're just going to have these 4 statements, what guidance then is going to be given to planning officers to follow with those 4 sentences in order to determine which land can be used, safeguarded land can actually be used, and how the planning application is going to be looked at in the round? Because if you say, well, it depends, well, then does it depend per how each officer reads each application, or is there a wider guidance for them?
Chair, I wonder if I could ask Matthias to come in, who's on the screen. I think these questions get to the heart of what does the tilted balance mean in reality. It's not a free-for-all, and so whilst there are things like access issues, it doesn't mean that those will just be disregarded. So I think it would perhaps be helpful if Matthias could just talk us through a little bit more. In practice, what does the tilted balance mean in terms of the determination, and how as a service are you going to deal with it?
Yeah, thank you, Edward. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Smage. It's a fair question. So we want to encourage developers, if they are going to speculate on safeguarded sites at this time, to use our pre-application service to gain technical advice from our officers in highways and planning and design and allied services. But the tilted balance is a very significant material planning consideration. It won't outweigh highway safety. I want to be clear about that. But we, as a principal matter, we want to accept that in order to boost supply, you have to find suitable sites that can add housing to your total numbers of planning permissions. And as a broader principle, Councillor Smage, it isn't necessarily the planning permission that's the issue at stake. It's the amount of build out of those permissions that's causing the lack of a 5-year supply. So each officer will be allocated a case. They will have the normal checks and balance through David Wordsworth as the group leader for the Development Management Service. They have my input for consistency and overview. They'll get member input in the pre-app process if members engage in that. And as with any planning application, we would consult, put the site notices up, send letters out and so forth, and listen to the views of the public. Where the tilted balance comes in is simply around, in principle, could this site be developed? And if it can, in principle, be developed, have we got the right level of plans? Have we got the right level of quality? And is it a safe and attractive development? And if those factors align, then it's likely that that would result in a positive recommendation to a planning committee. So that's the sort of process map that officers would apply. I think the previous position around POL, which members may recall, was that the council perhaps took a more stern position and in principle tried to resist development on land that was designated as the POL, the former safeguarded sites. This process that we're putting in front of scrutiny today and hope to take to Cabinet is designed to say that we'll be more pragmatic and grown up in dealing with proposals on sites such as safeguarded land. But what this doesn't do is give a free-for-all position to say if you apply, you will get planning permission. So it is about the detail of each case rather than in principle it's unacceptable to even apply in the first instance. I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to take any further questions on it.
Supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Matthias. It's a slightly different angle. This is about boosting supply. That's what our intent is. And you make the point, Matthias, that the issue isn't so much necessarily the number of planning permissions we're granting, it's the build-outs. The council has significant plans to develop some of the land that we actually own. What statement's being brought forward to try and bring forward or to speed up that? Because obviously if we speed up the development of housing on the land we already have that's allocated for housing, that we have some more influence over. Because obviously if it's a developer, we have very limited influence to force them in a way to get on with it. But we've got a greater capacity for ourselves. So it'd be interesting to know what we're doing as a council to assist with that challenge, with the land that we have more influence over. If that I hope I made sense.
No, you have. Happy to come back, Chair or colleagues.
Well, I'll pick it up if you want, Matthias. So last week we took a paper through to start the release of Fenny Lane, which is 160 houses. So that's now going out to soft market testing, and we're hoping to have someone signed up. We're quite optimistic we could have somebody signed up by the middle of next year at the latest to develop that site, and that'll be a joint venture with someone, with a partnership that does, as you rightly say, that enables us to build it out quicker, get the sort of housing we believe we need on that site. So that's moving forward. We've got 5 other sites that we're working with 13 Group on to bring them forward as well. They're our preferred operator on those sites. We've got an exclusivity deal on those, so those are working on them. So they are moving forward, but like everything, unfortunately, at the moment, the capacity in the organisation is not as great as perhaps we would like. But we are looking to get rid of as many, or work with as many partners as we can to get our own land into the market. Absolutely.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yeah, I guess I understand that. I mean, we've had through this committee before updates on where we are in terms of the developments where we have land. But for me, I'd like to see something that says, you know, this is a recognition we've got a problem, and here's a potential solution of how we can, to an extent, assist with that problem. What I'm not seeing is what we're doing to speed up. So, you know, are there things we can do to speed up the development and the build out on the land that we own? Yes, we're going out to soft market testing for Fenny Lane. Yes, we've got the 13 Group that's going to build out on these other sites. But what are we doing in terms of incentivising to speed up the build out on those sites? That's a question I think I'm asking. Because I'm not hearing that anything's changed from the position we were in maybe 3 weeks or 3 months ago in terms of the process we're using.
So I think whether it's changed in the last 3 weeks or 3 months, I don't know, because the whole issue of how can we accelerate delivery of these sites is one that's been upon us much longer than that. So the conversation about what can we do to, because you're absolutely right, your premise is absolutely right. We are a major landowner. Big allocations are for the council to bring forward. It's absolutely critical that we do that as quickly as possible. So the issue about are we going as quick as we possibly can? Is there anything we can do, a different approach that might get us there quicker? We care about building houses, not that we're the ones in control of everything, as long as it's the right quality and plan. Is there a quicker way from A to B is a question that's kind of hardwired into the projects from a while ago. Probably the 2 biggest examples I would give you, one obviously Dewsbury Riverside is our biggest housing allocation. The Cabinet report that Councillor Turner's just referred to talks about a delegation to appoint a master developer if we feel we can find one. So those conversations are taking place at the moment. So that's all about really getting a private sector partner who do build houses for a living to come in alongside the council, and I think that's probably the quickest way that we will get from A to B on that. So it's positive news that we're at a stage of the Dewsbury Riverside project now where we think we can start to try and appoint a master developer. That will be a very, very significant milestone. And then, for example, on Bradley, on the golf course, which is the other big allocation, I think the next biggest allocation, there we're looking at more of a phased approach. So we realise that to get everything sorted all in one go is a big task. So can we chop off some bits that are more deliverable and have a phased approach in order to try and get development moving? So this issue of acceleration isn't one that's purely triggered by this position. It's one that's been accepted for a while, really, and we're doing what we can at the project level to try and accelerate wherever possible.
Any additional questions?
Add to what Edward's saying. Again, I think it's a fair question around what we're doing to accelerate. What I would also say, we work with a number of partners, in particular West Yorkshire Combined Authority, as well as Homes England, in order to accelerate housing sites within Kirklees. We're active on around 40 housing sites, and the report that Councillor Turner referred to, each year we bring a similar report forward. We advise on which sites are progressing at the present time. So Fenny Lane is one of those, and Dewsbury Riverside that we featured in that report, but there is also commentary on the rest of the sites that we're taking forward in a housing growth programme. We have a dedicated team that sits with Edward that work across all of those sites. In some of those sites we may be we may take the development risk and progress forward to appointing contractors to develop out the sites. In other sites we are the land promoter, and we will be working with a number of others across those sites using the tools that are available to us through the planning process, but also working with our partners to draw down funding that's critical to allow house builders to move forward, because this is ultimately about reducing risk so that somebody else wants to put their money in to develop the sites out, either for housing for sale or housing for rent. In terms of the wider programme with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, I think members are all aware that we are involved with the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, which invests in road infrastructure in particular, and a number of the sites that we're interested in, particularly where we have land interests as a council, need further input in terms of the road infrastructure to allow for further development. That's a programme that's been going on for a number of years, and you'll have seen in terms of the completion of the scheme at the bottom of Leeds Road, the first of those schemes that we've completed with making use of the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, but there are other schemes, particularly related to North Kirklees, such as the Cooper Bridge scheme, that are deliberately designed in order to increase capacity so that we can move forward with further housing development in North Kirklees. So there is a fair link in terms of future road infrastructure and some of these sites being developed out. At the same time, we have a number of opportunities coming forward when Homes England bring forward funding pots. So the Brownfield Land Fund is just one of those, where we in Kirklees we've been successful and been awarded funding previously, but we will be looking at future waves of funding coming through the Brownfield Land Fund that we can develop previously developed land to ensure that we're not incurring further development in terms of greenbelt land. So to your point of how are we looking to accelerate funding, we don't just do that on our own. We work with our partners and we ensure that we put in place the appropriate infrastructure, but also draw down the funding at the time when it's available. And we're working on the long-term strategic programme for housing development across Kirklees.
Supplementary?
Yeah, if I may come back. I suppose where I'm coming from is I'm just reflecting what I'm likely to hear when I go back into my communities. So what my community are going to turn around and say is that there's land that they don't really want to see developed being put at risk. So what is Kirklees doing with the land that it owns to develop that first? And I suppose for me, what I'm still not hearing, and I don't expect an answer today to be fair, but I would ask to reflect on, is are there incentives we could give, additional incentives we could give to some of the developers on those sites that gives them the incentive to develop quicker, to move faster, so that we can get that build out increase? So I don't know, some sort of discount or something if they, hit a certain target. That's what I mean about incentives. I don't expect an answer. It would have to be one that was considered in terms of the financial impact of those. But I'm just reflecting what I'm hearing in my communities, which is there's land that they don't think is appropriate to build on being put potentially at risk of development now, because the sites that we said 5 years ago should be developed haven't yet got there, and a big chunk of those are actually owned by the council. So it's a reputational risk really for the council itself, that it's because we haven't got as far as we would have liked to have got, and I think we all understand the reasons for some of that. We're now saying that other land becomes available or potentially available. and that, you know, there are concerns around that. So really it's, you know, a bit of reflection about is there more we could do to increase the build out, not so much secure more funding or secure more sites, you know, the brownfield funding, it's all very welcome, but the sites we've already got, how do we get them moving a little bit faster, and is there anything else we could do? So that's just an ask really. I don't actually expect you to go, oh well, we could do this or we could do that, but just want to reflect on and maybe take away.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you might want to say to your communities, some of the people who might be wanting to buy or develop these sites might have 2,000 houses sat in planning permission that they haven't dealt with. So it's a land bank the problem. Last time I checked, I'd be about 8,000 outstanding applications. I mean, I sat on planning for 10 years, and I drive past on a regular basis sites that I know have had permission for 4, 5, 6 years, and they haven't put a brick on them. So one of the problems is not, you're right, we need to try and speed our processes up, but some of these are incredibly complicated. When you're looking at Dewsbury Riverside with several landowners needing funding from Homes England, these things, unfortunately, because it's local government and national government funded, do take a bit of time. But it's the land banking that's, for me, is the biggest problem. If they cracked on with land banked, we wouldn't have a problem. We really wouldn't. So as I say, some of those developers who might be looking to scoop up some of these sites have probably got in the back pocket sites with permission that they haven't developed. And I don't know how you do it, because I've thought about this. I don't know what even legislation could bring. I don't think you can, but that's the problem. We need to encourage those with planning permission to get on and build them.
Further comment?
Yeah, I fully understand where Councillor Turner's coming from. We'd love to be able to influence more some of the bigger housing developers. We recognise that's probably not within our gift. What is within our gift is the land that we own. And that's why I'm making that point. I fully understand where you're coming from, Graham. I'm totally with you. But we don't have the same ability to influence them as we do our own sites. And that's why I'm saying we need to be thinking about, are there other incentives we could offer to try and speed up the build out of the sites where we have influence? Because the sites where we don't have influence, there's not a lot we can really do.
I just have a comment to make on that, and I think something, a bit of food for thought. If we start giving incentives, that may open us up to areas that we may not be able to control later on. But that's for officers to think about and come back later.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, much the same. I think if, given the state of, or the precarious position we are in financially as a council, I think offering financial incentives to, or any sort of discounts would be a incredibly risky place. It's something worth discussing though, and I think it might warrant maybe coming back to a different meeting with sort of a report on where we are with current sort of council housing allocations, because this report before us today is just a statement of intent before, well, sort of the preamble before the full local plan review, and then when we get into that, I'm sure each site will be going back and forwards between developers and residents, and we'll be having all those discussions and debates at that point. So I think just for what is in front of us today, I think that's, as I say, it's quite a straightforward statement of intent, really. But it would be worth a future meeting, not the next one, but maybe a couple more down the road, just having a specific item regarding the council sites and how we're progressing with those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Smage?
Yeah, thanks. In your Cabinet report that you're going to take this item to Cabinet, are you just leaving it to the statements, or are you expanding and any areas? So, for instance, are you going to be saying what the council is going to be doing as part of your Cabinet report? Also, you were talking about the listening to members of the public and listening to ward councillors and everything in the inputs to the to any planning applications that should come. What happens then when you get to planning committee? You then get something said, well, in actual fact, because we haven't got a 5-year supply, etc., etc. So is that going to still be in place, or does this measure mean that that's not going to be in place? Also, how how is this linked with the council's requirements to have so many affordable houses each year? Because I can't see anything in here that addresses affordable housing need.
Officers to reply?
I'll address the affordable housing issue first. So whatever application comes in, it will still be judged against the planning policies within the local plan. So we've got LP 11, which looks at the mix of development. We've also got the supplementary planning document, which sets out about the mix of sites on site. So we will still have that commitment to look at affordable housing as part of the requirements for bringing sites forward. As Matthias said, this is about a positive approach about trying to encourage a supply. It's not about allowing sites through which aren't, say, up to standard on the highways and don't comply with, say, open space policies, affordable housing policies. We will still be assessing the applications against those. This is just a mechanism to, like I said, try and boost that supply.
Supplementary?
Yeah, on the affordable housing, yes, we have policies, but then it seems that we don't always get the amount of affordable housing on a development that maybe we would initially require. So how, if this is saying actually we're going to allow development on some land that we're not normally going to develop on, then is that still going to be the case, that there's still going to be the negotiations over the developer says we can only do this and the policy says this?
With every application, the developer will come forward with the viability of it, and that's where the negotiations will be. And we will need to look at the viability of that. Sometimes there's a balance between affordable housing, open space, education, depending on the site, and those negotiations will still go forward, but they'll be along the local plan policies that we've got. Again, it will be no sort of dropping of standards. We'll start with the policy framework and then negotiate on those applications.
Chair, if I can just answer the first question around inclusion in this report of the comments about developing out the council's land. I'd suggest it's probably not the right report for that to be addressed in detail. What we can do is provide an appropriate reference to the other cabinet reports that I mentioned before. So it's very clear that the council are working to develop out its land and that people can follow that through. But it's important with this report, it's important to keep the focus in terms of the local plan review and what's needed in terms of this housing position statement, so that the decision makers are very clear what's being asked of them.
Councillor Turner, did you want to respond?
No, well, I was going to, but officers covered it by the fact that whenever, if any of these sites do come forward, they still have to go through the normal policy, normal planning procedure, normal policies, and there's, again, some new sound committee for long enough. Viability is always an issue. Developers say, well, I can only afford this, and we say, prove it. So sometimes they prove it, sometimes they don't. So it is sometimes it's a bit of a game of cat and mouse, but we will always endeavour to get as much affordable homes as we possibly can. But as I say, sometimes it is a bit of a game of cat and mouse, unfortunately.
Additional question, Councillor Smith? That's all right. Councillor Pando?
Thanks, Chair. What might be an idea in future if we can actually get some kind of assurance process in place, going from what John's talking about in terms of the council land that's already in the plan. So we do have an understanding. So that's something that we might want to consider. Assurances back that we are actually doing everything we can, which I'm sure we are. If we can document that. Thanks.
Do officers want to respond?
I was just going to say that the policy team will continue to work with our housing growth colleagues to make sure that we're working across the council to deliver the council's aspirations in terms of housing. This report is just one of many mechanisms that we're looking at to bring forward the housing supply within the district. The local plan update also provides us another opportunity to relook at the evidence, undertake a new strategic housing market assessment, look at population figures. We're promised a new housing calculation. Andrew knows more about that than me. All that will come together to look at a revised position of how we move forward, and we'll need to work with members, our communities and developers to try and achieve that.
Chair, if I can just say that with regards to a particular suggestion, you come in, I think in April, you'll be having a new work plan for this particular committee. It sounds like this is probably one of the early reports that you'll want for the new work plan. Looking at your plan at the present time, it's very, very full up until April. So if you want that report, we can bring it, but you're going to have to choose something to come off the work plan in the meantime.
Supplementary?
Oh, no, sorry, my question's been answered. I was just making sure that my understanding was correct, that this is a statement of intent. It does not supersede planning policy or the mountains of planning regulations that there are in place. And, yeah, that has been confirmed. So, yeah, I'm a happy bunny. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have, I won't say it's a question per se, I'd say just seeking a bit of clarity. Early on in the presentation, officers said these sites have been looked at where constraints can be overcome. Has that been assessed in terms of highway safety, environmental health, land, stability, etc.? So has that work already been done to make that statement? Thank you.
We're not saying that the constraints can be overcome at this moment in time. The sites were assessed as part of the local plan process to look at their suitability for housing. And yes, we did consult environmental health, all our partners, development management, development highways, teams, and they were not considered at that time suitable enough to be allocated for housing in the local plan. At that time, we were preparing the plan. So it's whether these sites can come forward with those constraints addressed or mitigated against.
I think for me was, in terms of this statement, it's not really speeding the process up, it's bringing the sites forward. There's an existing process in place for applicants to put an inquiry in, but other than bringing them forward, is that kind of the bottom line?
It's looking at the possible potential early release of these sites before we prepare local plan 2. So normally we would not assess these sites until we came to preparing local plan 2. But because we've got a lack of 5-year land supply, national planning policy says that we have to apply a presumption in favour of sustainable development. So we'd still have to apply that presumption even if we didn't have this statement. This statement just provides additional clarity to developers, agents, those submitting planning applications, that as to how, as an authority, we will deal with those applications in a proactive and reasonable way.
Thank you. Any additional questions, comments? Thank you. Thank you, officers, for all of that information. Just moving on to item 8 on the agenda, update on our cultural heart, part of Huddersfield Blueprint. David Glover was it Councillor Taylor would like to?
Yeah, I'll do an introduction. So this is, Chair, this is just an update on where we are with the cultural art. We've got a few slides for you to show you progress and what we think we're aiming for. And as I said, David, our project lead, is here with us to run through these as well and answer any questions when we get to that point.
Okay, good morning. So I've got a few slides. I'll keep them brief and then we can have the discussion. So we're here because we committed a long time ago to give regular updates in between approval gateways. So this update is a little bit closer perhaps to Gateway 4, as I'll explain in a moment, due to capacity constraints on the agenda, but the commitment was that we would come to scrutiny in between gateways and do a little bit of a look back, what's happened, what have we done, and a little bit of a look forward in terms of what is ahead of us. So that's what these slides and this discussion aims to do. So I'm going to cover briefly what we did and have done since Gateway 3, what that means overall in terms of the master plan, a bit more specific about phase 1, which, as you would imagine from the first phase, is what we're about to bring to Cabinet, the timelines for that, and then a little bit more of a look out in time around the future phases. So, Gateway 3, so the gateways that the Council's adopted are tied to the REBA stages of development. So Gateway 3 was where the concept design was nailed down, and we were then looking at spatial coordination. That's the headline master planning of the scheme, moving towards Gateway 4, which is the technical design where all the detail is buttoned down. So in time, in June 2023, going back in time, we went to Cabinet with Gateway 3. So that wasn't an unconditional approval, that was just an approval to sign off the spatial coordination and move towards the technical design. That really locked in, though, the principle of phasing at the time. So as you know, rather than doing the whole of the Cultural Heart project in one go, it was decided to take a phased approach, which introduces significant benefits in terms of flexibility, able to respond to market opportunity, able to secure external funding and so on. But the Gateway 3 report in June this year really locked in the principle of phasing, and it confirmed then what phase 1 was, which we'll talk about in a moment. It sought delegated authority to make the necessary contractual arrangements with the delivery team. The most noticeable of all of those, the whole sort of point at the Gateway 3 report, was to appoint BAM Construction Limited for phase 1 and get them working, because the whole thing wasn't unconditional. We weren't committing to the construction at that stage. What we were doing was appointing BAM to work initially on what's called a PCSA, a pre-contract services agreement, to get us up to Gateway 4. So getting the contractor on board early, getting them then to pick up the detailed design to get us to the position where we can go back to Cabinet with Gateway 4 in terms of the final scheme, much more certainty around cost, and seek approval to proceed or not to proceed from Gateway 4 onwards. So that was really what we've been focusing on since June. The June report also then, as you sort of go out a little bit further in time, talked about the principle of combining the museum and the gallery. So rather than having a separate museum and a separate gallery, mindful of cost and value for money at all stages, the Gateway 3 report confirmed that the principle of a combined museum and gallery rather than separate, and then that frees up a future development site on the Queen Street plot that was previously going to be the gallery. And it talked about some intended uses and some market interest in the Queen Street plot. So fundamentally, in June this year, we went to Cabinet, we set out the work today, and we got approval to proceed with the items that I've just gone through there. So as a quick orientation and reminder, this is the Cultural Heart Red Line boundary. These are the main blocks. So the phase 1 is the library, which hopefully you can see there in the blue, the food hall in the yellow, and the public realm and the event square in grey. So that's really what we're talking about for phase 1, and then the future phases are to come after that with some flexibility around it. So whilst there is the whole point of the master plan and the phased approaches, there is an overall plan, but there is then flexibility to move things forward or backwards according to specific opportunity, or to flex the plan a little bit if that's what we want to do. But for this presentation, I'm focusing more around phase 1, because that is what is the subject of the Gateway 4 report, which is due to go to Cabinet soon. So for phase 1, new library, food hall and event square, As I've said, we've had BAM working since June under the PCSA contract, getting into the absolute nuts and bolts of this, and they are now at a point where we are close to, stress close to, having a final contract sum. There are still some elements of value engineering to ensure value for money in the scheme, which we're going through with members and with BAM. But the intention is to get to a point where we can positively recommend to Cabinet that we have an amount that won't be exceeded through the construction contract negotiations, and then we would ask members to allow us to proceed with the award of that contract within that envelope, not beyond it. So the timeline to get us to Cabinet for Gateway 4 would be then that we would, subject to Gateway 4 approval at Cabinet in December, we would be aiming for an early start on site, early to mid 2024, and then with completion of phase 1 towards the back end of 2025. So that's phase 1, which, as I say, is the subject, overwhelmingly the subject of the next Gateway 4 Cabinet report. But it's worth then just zooming out again and thinking more broadly in terms of the master plan itself and where that leaves future phases. So the Gateway 3 report was for the whole master plan, and so we have planning consent for the whole master plan. That was approved at Strategic Planning Committee on the 2nd of March. As I said, that report also talked about took the decision to go for a combined museum and gallery rather than separate. And so since then, we're carrying on the process of working through the feasibility work and working with the services about what that service offer is going to be. That's not quite as pressing as phase 1, clearly, because it's a bit further out in time, and that work is ongoing. Overwhelmingly, the expectation is that services are going to be meeting those pressures through their own budgets, because we have existing services now. This is about moving those existing services into the new combined museum and gallery, but services will be bringing forward their own reports in due course on those items. And then I've mentioned the Queen Street plot, so this plot that's been freed up by creating the combined museum and gallery. That is perhaps one of, if not the best development sites in Huddersfield then. And at Gateway 3, we outlined some positive conversations that were taking place at the time with Greenhead College around some external funding for capacity fund and for a STEM centre. Unfortunately, those external funding bids from Greenhead College were not successful, so we're continuing to talk to and work with Greenhead on potential alternative funding streams, see whether that's possible, or whether or not we need to look again at the other alternatives for the plot, which have been worked on in the background around a potential hotel or potential residential. So I would say that's a good example of the benefits of phasing, where if those bids had been successful, that Queen Street plot would probably have accelerated earlier in the programme, would have otherwise have been the case. Unfortunately, that opportunity didn't land, so we're not able to accelerate it, but that's phasing in practice for you. And then the final point then is that you'll probably be familiar that through the Queensgate Market, that's now vacant, and the last remaining retail units on Alexandra Walk will be vacated by the end of January 24. So some of those meanwhile uses and some of the existing retailers, as those leases come to their end, we are obviously phasing that, coordinating that very closely with when we need vacant possession to do any early enabling works and to allow BAM to get on site early next year if that is the decision at Gateway 4. And I think that's just the aerial view to finish with before we throw it open to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
I know I'm supposed to be only observing, but I can never manage it. Can I just ask, you mentioned there about other services bringing forward their budget requirements when you were talking about museum and galleries. Can you just expand a bit on what you were meaning in that? Are other services going to be able to bring forward plans in their budgets, or are those discussions ongoing?
Yeah, there's time obviously now before we get to phase 2. Indeed, obviously Cabinet need to make a positive decision to move into phase 2 at Gateway 4. The particular report that's going in December doesn't ask for that. It asks for the fees up until that point, so we can get that to the same position where phase 1 is at the present time. In the meantime, similar to all services are aware that Council is financially constrained and are looking at their budgets appropriately. So taking on board any costs that come as a result of investments, such as our cultural heart, remodelling their services and bringing forward proposals as appropriate. Now, it's difficult to second guess what those proposals will be because some services are able to attract additional funding from outside. So museums and galleries, for instance, have been very, very successful indeed, as most members know, in attracting additional external funding to deliver existing services and also to fund new services when they've been brought forward in the past. So clearly what we're going to be doing is working with all of our services so they can look at what funding is available, what partners are available for them to work with. So it doesn't necessarily all have to be council delivery, and to bring forward proposals to Cabinet at the right time so Cabinet can look at what the service provision is going to be and how it's going to be paid for ahead of making the financial commitments in order to build out that phase of the development.
Okay, so what you're saying is you would need that in place before you decide to go to building work. So is that before the December decision or after the December decision? It's part of the February budget process?
No, as I said in my previous answer to you, these are separate arrangements. This is the decision in December is for phase 1 to move into contract with phase 1. What we're talking about now is phase 2. With regards to phase 2, we're only asking for the fees in order to get the council up to the point where it can move into a procurement process and get to the stage where we are at phase 1 at this stage. What I would expect in terms of any phase moving forward is that there is a clear indication that either the service can live within the means that it's currently got in terms of delivering that service. Indeed, that's what we've done for phase 1. Or if there is additional funding required, there is a clear indication as to where that funding is coming from. So to be absolutely clear, I am not talking about phase 1. With regards to your question, we were talking about phase 2, and that's for a later date, and that's sometime down the road. As Edward said, in terms of the timetable there, we're not expecting to get to a point where we award a contract on phase 2 for the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know about the timelines for that, for those decisions, because obviously with the financial constraints there are currently, making sure that those will be coming in a timely manner so that when services need to put in provision for this, these new facilities, then those discussions are happening in that way.
Absolutely, and as with this programme all the way through, I will ensure that Cabinet are made aware of the commitments that they're being asked to enter into and any additional implications that come for any services, whether that's additional funding that's needed or whether the service needs to redesign its service offer in order to accommodate what's coming forward. So as has been the case with the 5 Cabinet reports that have already been presented on this matter, and with future Cabinet reports, I will always make sure that those implications are very clear for the decision makers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Edward, for the presentation. Brilliant as always. We've got 3 specific questions. Under 1.2, securing appropriate resources, the 5.6 million underspend was down to, didn't progress as originally, the capital development budget that didn't need progressing as originally envisaged. Can I have a bit more detail as to what those were? Another question I've got is under, I don't know, forgive me, I'm terrible with the points, but it's on page 25, the Town Centre Operational Board, established to review the management of Huddersfield Town Centre, including our cultural heart. Can I ask who that consists of as well? Who's that made up of? And the final question I've got, let me just find it, is it's one I've seen before in some of the Cabinet papers, the establishment of the Our Cultural Heart Fund for cash contributions, which will help strengthen community and voluntary sector partners who are delivering place-based working throughout Kirklees. Is that already established? Is there a timetable on when that will be established? And is there a bit more detail that can be brought, maybe not today, but at some point, as to how our community bodies and third sector access that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll take at least the first question. In terms of the underspend and the fees, as you can imagine, delivering the full project would need a bigger team around us, architects and so basically we were able to slim down with the introduction of phasing. We were able to slim down the team and make the money that had originally been approved go further. So that's why it was described as an underspend that we could utilise for the next phase. Yeah.
Chair, if I can answer on the second one, in terms of the operational board, that's an officer board. So Joanne Bartholomew, who's the director who reports to me, is the chair of that board, and there are officers from across the council who are involved with, indeed it links to the point that Councillor Smage was making previously around understanding what the operational costs are going to be for the cultural heart. So we have officers from across the council services that are involved in delivering services that are linked into the cultural heart. So that would be museums and galleries, but it would also be libraries, it would also be the asset management and facilities management colleagues to understand the full extent of the cost of running and understanding the preparation for that board. The board itself featured in previous cabinet reports, so it was clear of the intention that in terms of project governance, that there would be a need not just to have a board for the development of the cultural heart, which I chair, but also to have the operational board, which focuses solely on the operational implications, making sure that we're ready for that. The proceeds of both of those boards go into the cabinet reports that are coming forward, so that members are kept absolutely up to speed and aware of any of the implications.
And then the last question around the cultural heart funds, all around social value, that's ahead of us, so we haven't set that up yet. BAM, if appointed for the construction contract, would be one of the major contributors to that. What we have been doing is looking at other places where there's good examples of where other places have set something similar up, and what's the appropriate governance for that, and how formal or restrictive that governance needs to be. So we've been getting our things ready in the background, but it's not formally launched yet. That's ahead of us.
Yeah, can I have suspension on the back of the last one there? The other end's absolutely fine, what I'm looking for as well. But the in terms of, do we know what phase that will kick in? Would that be more phase 2 or 3 when that kicks in? It'll be right at the end of the cultural heart. When will that?
No, it'll kick in from phase 1. It's just that at this point in time, we're not committed to phase 1. So as soon as we are, we would launch that.
Chair, if I could just add on that one, I've run a similar fund to that one previously on a very large project similar to this one in the previous council that I worked for. It worked very well because it was real-time awards that were being made to a number of charitable concerns and community concerns around that particular local authority area. There are other areas that have done similar. It's just a different way of delivering social value whilst large construction contracts are in place. So there are any number of different organisations that get involved and want to give back to the place where they're delivering a large construction contract. This allows them to do it in a way that complements some of the more standard ways that we would see social value coming through, such as apprenticeships on site and those kinds of things. This is to ensure that local groups can definitely benefit and financially benefit as the project progresses.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Edward. I just want to come back to the Queen Street plot, really. And my worry bead on the Queen Street plot is whether it comes forward as the college or residential or a hotel, whatever we end up as being the end state, is the likelihood is that will require some car parking. So if you've got a hotel, you're going to have people coming to the hotel. If you've got residential, people will require somewhere to park their cars. Not only am I not clear where that would be, but also the access to that site off the ring road isn't brilliant because you can only get to it one way. And if you're coming from the south, when you come into Huddersfield, and we've made this point before, you're on the wrong side of the ring road. So I'm not clear. It's for me, at the moment, it's a worry bead. It's probably a risk. It's something that needs to be, properly thought through. But yes, it sounds like a really good idea. We've got this vacant plot. You're absolutely right. We need to do something appropriate with it. But it does bring with it that concern about how do people get to it. Particularly, if it's some sort of, if it's a hotel or something like that, people going in the evening for events or something like that, how do they get there? And when they do get there, where do they park? Because if they're coming from out of the district. And of course, in big chunks of the borough, there aren't any public transport in the evening. So they're going to have to, if they're coming in the evening, they're going to have to use a car. They can get a bus in, but they can't get a bus home again. So my worry is, it's right in the centre of town. As you say, brilliant plot. But then how do you get to it? And where do you park when you get there?
Chair, if I can just start the response, and others might want to come in. In terms of the cultural heart overall, the transport planning was undertaken as part of the planning application that came forward, so quite robust transport planning to identify the car parking spaces that are available across Huddersfield Town Centre, but also the other means of transportation that get people to the site, and they would be the same for whatever use the site is put to. That said, we would expect that if there is a change to the planning use of the site, then an appropriate change to the planning application would have to be brought forward. And as part of that planning application, we would expect that there would be clarity in terms of any implications, such as transport planning for the site. What I would say, though, that our experience on other similar uses elsewhere in Huddersfield Town Centre, for instance, you mentioned a hotel use. If it were to be looked at as a hotel use, we are taking forward the hotel at the George Hotel outside the train station. That doesn't have its own dedicated car parking because hoteliers are more than comfortable and have lots of experience of delivering town and city centre hotels without their own dedicated car parking. What they need to see is that there is appropriate and sufficient car parking within the locality to suit their needs. That doesn't necessarily deal with all of the concerns that are raised by your question. So what I would also draw you to is that in the full master plan, there is provision of a multi-storey car park, which would be the next door plot to this one. And that's part of a later phase, which is obviously on the plot of what is the previous multi-storey car park. But in the meantime, we need to use that plot in order to provide compound for the area. So in the fullness of time, there will be dedicated car parking on this site, but any use that comes forward in the meantime, we would have to demonstrate that actually there is sufficient transport and travel provision as well as car parking. For now, we have that in terms of the planning application that was approved.
Supplementary?
I still don't think it addresses the issue about how you access the site particularly from the south of the district, because you can't get there easily, because you get to the ring road and you're on the wrong side of the ring road.
Sorry, I see your point now. There are provisions, obviously, in terms of people can travel around the ring road if they choose to do so. There are a number of routes where people can access the site and choose their transport planning. That was all attended to in advance of the planning application being determined for the cultural heart. And indeed, it was deemed appropriate for development of the whole of the site.
Additional question?
I just don't believe it's doable.
I think what officers are saying, it was done as part and assessed as part of the planning application.
I understood what they said. Absolutely understood what they said. I live in the south of the district. I know what it's like driving into Huddersfield, getting round the ring road, and trying to access the inner part of the in road. Know how difficult that is. If you're somebody who doesn't know the area well, you'll just be going round and round the ring road.
I think it is what it is. If the application was decided when it was decided, it was probably more...
Don't disagree, Chair. I just think we made the wrong decision.
We'll move on. Councillor Hawkins?
Yeah, I just want to... Sorry, I was mulling this one over, and I think it would be remiss of me not to mention anything. Back to what we were discussing on the our Cultural Heart Fund. Since that was initially sort of put forward as part of the Cultural Heart when it was first agreed by Cabinet and then through the planning process, the council, the country, has hit quite tough financial times. And at a recent Cabinet meeting I was at, we were discussing certain community assets that are owned by the council that are going to have to go out to be community asset transferred or could be marked as surplus. Appreciate this isn't what was intended at the time, but is there something that could be explored potentially where the money that is earmarked for our Cultural Heart Fund, which will be accessed by community groups and third sector, could instead be used internally by the council to maintain some of those assets which are used by community and are used by third sector, so it is helping them in a different sort of way. I appreciate that wasn't originally what was intended, but given how much things have changed since the original planning, since it first came to Cabinet and planning, is that something that might be explorable? Just throwing it out there.
Chair, if I could say, it wouldn't be my advice to supplement council budgets or particularly try to offset some of the reduction in council budgets by future revenues that we don't yet know what's going to come through this. I would suggest that with regards to this particular proposal, if Cabinet are minded to move forward with a Cultural Heart Fund, that they should look to employ the council's social value strategy and what that is seeking to do. And you may well find that you might end up with similar arrangements as you work through that, because community groups will be able to put forward their proposals to the fund, and it will be administered obviously, and decisions made according to the proposals that come to them. I wouldn't necessarily advise trying to offset some of the council's financial challenges by use of this fund. This is more aimed at communities, but as I said, you might end up at the same point with particular proposals that come forward just because of the timeliness of them.
Councillor McCarthy?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't mention it at the beginning of the meeting, but just a declaration of interest. My dad runs a business in Huddersfield Town Centre. It was about the use of the Queen Street plot. It's, of course, disappointing to see Greenhead College not get the funding that it asked for, but it is quite heartening to see that you continue to work with them. I don't know if you've also approached the university about using that plot, because it is quite... That area is obviously being very close to the existing university site. It's quite a good opportunity, I think. Particularly as well, I think, speaking with residents, I think some people do also think the university can be a bit separate from the existing town centre, so trying to kind of move that a bit more into the town centre as well to kind of help with the rest of the regeneration. So I don't know if that's been considered or...
I think your broader point, I think, is absolutely right. I think, whilst it's not far geographically, the impact of the ring road, the severance that creates, the feeling that the university campus is just outside the town centre, I think is one we would all recognise. And anything we can do to make the university feel much more in the centre of the town would be of benefit, I think. So I think it's got merit. I suppose the bottom line is the university were involved with Greenhead actually in terms of, I think it was the STEM rather than the capacity fund bid, so there was a university involvement, but it was led by Greenhead. We're still talking to Greenhead FSA. That may be able to be resurrected with other means or not. We don't fully know that yet. We talk to the universities on a very regular basis. I think it's probably fair to say they don't currently have a requirement for that, to the best of my knowledge, but we keep talking, and it's worth keeping on the radar, definitely.
Supplementary?
I don't think it's exactly following on from that, but it was just to talk about the Cultural Heart Fund, which is, having read the social value statement, I don't think this is the intention of the fund, but I hope it doesn't distract from kind of more traditional use of social value, like providing local opportunities for people and so on. Because I think that is something that I quite strongly believe in.
Yeah, no, it complements it, and it was, you know, purposefully set out in that way that to raise the bar, really, in, you know, in terms of social value and what's expected. I could also add that social value has been contributed already from the consultants, the designers, the architects, the engineers. They have been doing, you know, so even in the sort of procurement of the contractor and stage and the design, social value has been taking place.
Anyone have any additional questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you to officers. Does any members of the panel have any queries about the work programme and forward plan?
Item